Imagine a crisp October afternoon shattered by Darlene. Visor on, name stitched in bold cursive on her polo. Storming my front yard like she owns the deed. Clipboard raised like a battle flag, she points up at the tree fort my 8-year-old son and I poured our hearts into. Fresh pines still sharp in the air. Paint tacky under his bright orange handprint on the beam. Our proud little mark. She stares me down.
14 days, tear that monstrosity down, or face 400 monthly fines. Clock's ticking.
No mercy, no negotiation, just pure HOA tyranny. That ultimatum lit a fire. Months later, the tree fort? Gone. But what rose in its place changed everything. Darlene never saw it coming, and trust me, she felt it. What would you do when they come for your kid's dream? Tear it down? Or build something they can't touch? Drop your city, Florida, Texas? Show me you're out there fighting these HOA nightmares. My name is Garrett Holloway, and I want to be clear about something before we go any further. I am not a lawyer. I'm not a contractor. I'm a 44-year-old diesel mechanic from Maple Creek, Ohio, a mid-sized suburb that looks like a stock photo of the American dream. All cul-de-sacs and minivans and people who wave at you from their driveways. I moved here 6 years ago after my wife Renata and I decided our apartment in Columbus was no place to raise our son Cole, who was then 2 years old and already destroying things faster than I could fix them. We saved for 4 years. We bought a 3-bedroom ranch house on Sycamore Terrace, in a neighborhood governed by the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. HOA dues, $175 a month. We read the CC and Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the way most people read the iTunes terms of service. Fast, skimming, trusting that nothing crazy was buried in there. Rookie mistake. The neighborhood was fine. The neighbors were mostly fine. The houses were well kept. There was a community pool nobody used after Labor Day, and a newsletter nobody read, except to find out whose dog had been cited for barking. Normal suburban stuff. Darlene Fitch, that Darlene, had lived on Sycamore Terrace for 19 years. She'd been on the HOA board for 11 of them. She was the Compliance and Architectural Review Chair, which is a title that in a functioning democracy means the person who makes sure nobody parks a boat in their driveway. In Darlene's hands, it meant something considerably darker. Total aesthetic control over a 2-block radius, administered with the passion of a general and the pettiness of a hall monitor. I'd had small run-ins with her before. A letter about my garbage cans being visible from the street. They weren't. A verbal warning about a Halloween inflatable that she claimed violated a seasonal display ordinance that, when I looked it up, applied only to commercial properties. Each time, I let it go. Each time, she got a little bolder. Now, I'm not a man who goes looking for fights, but I do believe in the principle that if you let a bully win once, they will come back. Every single time. Cole had been begging for a tree fort since he was 5. We had a massive pin oak in the backyard. Old tree, good bones, the kind of tree that looks like it's been there since the Civil War. And in the summer before 2nd grade, he started leaving drawings of what he wanted on my workbench. Blueprints, in crayon. Little guy even labeled them. Dad's Fort 2, he wrote on one of them, misspelling Dad's in a way that broke my heart in the best possible direction. So we built it. 6 weekends. Him handing me screws while I drove them in with a battery drill that smelled of 3-in-1 oil and metal shavings. The platform was 8 feet off the ground, solid, anchored with lag bolts into the oak's main crotch. We added a rope ladder, a small roof, a flag Cole painted himself, a green dinosaur on a white background, which apparently represented a specific dinosaur named Gerald, who was the toughest dinosaur, Cole's words. The whole thing was in the backyard, not visible from the street, and set back more than 30 feet from every property line. I was careful. I'd looked up the local building code. Structures under 200 square feet, under 10 feet high, not attached to the house, in the backyard. No permit required in our municipality. I thought I'd done everything right. I had not counted on Darlene. She showed up on a Thursday morning, crisp autumn air, leaves crunching under her sensible shoes, clipboard in hand, and informed me that Section 7, Clause 14b of the CC and Rs prohibited accessory structures of a non-conforming design visible from any adjacent property. Darlene's lot backed up to mine. She could see the fort from her upstairs bathroom window. 14 days, $400 a month. Cole was inside eating cereal. He had no idea his dinosaur fort was already on death row. I'll be honest with you, my first reaction wasn't clever. My first reaction was pure, white-hot anger. The kind that makes your jaw clench and your hands go still in that way that means you are holding yourself back from saying something you can't unsay. I stood in my own driveway and watched Darlene click back up the sidewalk in her white sneakers. And I thought about all the men and women who'd ever been told to sit down and be quiet by someone with a clipboard and a title. And I felt every single one of them standing right behind me. But anger doesn't win. I know that. 20 years of working on engines with other people's trucking schedules depending on me has taught me that the loudest reaction is almost never the most effective one. You diagnose, you plan, you fix. First thing I did was go inside and read Section 7, Clause 14, B, in full. Not skimming this time. Full read, pencil in hand, yellow highlighter burning through every word. No accessory structure, including but not limited to sheds, playhouses, gazebos, or decorative installations, shall be erected if visible from any adjacent property in a manner inconsistent with the aesthetic character of the community. There it was. Visible from any adjacent property, aesthetic character. Two very subjective phrases. Two phrases that meant Darlene could point at almost anything she didn't like and call it a violation. Which is, of course, exactly what she'd been doing for 11 years. I took photos of the fort, measured it, photographed it from every angle of Darlene's property line. I walked her fence, looking through the gaps in the pickets, and I'll be straight with you, you could see the fort. Just barely, from a specific angle, through a gap between two fence boards, if you were standing in exactly the right spot and looking for it. Not exactly a visual blight on the landscape, but technically, visible. Darlene wasn't wrong on the letter of the law. She was wrong on the spirit of it, and on basic human decency. But those things, unfortunately, don't have their own clause. I called Renata at work. She's a paralegal, not a lawyer, but she reads legal language the way I read engine schematics. Fast, accurate, looking for the failure point. She's on solid ground with the CC&Rs, Renata told me, and I could hear her flipping pages on the other end of the line. But the CC&Rs are a contract, Garrett. Contracts have limits. The question is whether there's a precedent for selective enforcement. Selective enforcement. That phrase went into my mental file cabinet. Because here's the thing about Darlene. She had favorites. 3 houses down from mine, Walt Braddock, retired, white-haired, absolutely beloved by Darlene, had a full-size storage shed visible from the street, painted barn red. It had been there for 8 years. No letters, no fines. Walt brought Darlene Christmas cookies every year and sat on the HOA social committee, and his barn red shed stood there like a monument to the way the rules only applied to people Darlene didn't like. I started documenting. For 5 days, I drove and walked the neighborhood with my phone camera and a legal pad. Every structure that might qualify as an accessory structure, visible from adjacent property. A decorative windmill on Marguerite Hensley's side yard. A playhouse behind the Torcello family's fence, turrets, a drawbridge, the works, visible clear as day from the sidewalk. 3 sheds, 2 pergolas, 1 gazebo with a string of lights that honestly looked great. None of them had received letters. I cross-referenced by talking to neighbors, casually, cup of coffee style, nothing alarming, asking if they'd ever had any issues with the HOA. The answer was consistent. If Darlene liked you, no issues. If Darlene didn't like you, or if you'd ever pushed back on her even slightly, the clipboard came out. I'd pushed back once. 2 years ago, at an HOA meeting, I'd raised my hand and asked why the pool resurfacing budget had jumped 40% in a single year. Polite question. Legitimate question. Darlene had looked at me the way a cat looks at something it's considering torturing, and said the board would review the matter internally. That was it. That was my crime. I'd asked a question about money, in public, and Darlene had added me to her mental list. On day 7 of my documentation project, I sent a certified letter to the HOA board, not just Darlene, all 5 members, with a 3-page attachment, photographs, addresses, and descriptions of 31 accessory structures that appeared to violate Section 7, Clause 14b, by the same standard applied to my son's tree fort. I requested that either all 31 properties receive compliance notices within 14 days, or the notice issued to me be formally withdrawn. I also mentioned, in the most polite language I could manage, that selective enforcement of HOA covenants may expose the association to civil liability. Renata wrote that last part. The following Tuesday, I got a phone call from the HOA board president, a nervous man named Clifton Mears, who sounded like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. He said, and I want you to hear his exact words, "Garrett, we appreciate your, thoroughness, but the board feels the original notice stands." "Okay, Clifton," I said. "Then you'll be hearing from me again soon." The next move Darlene made told me everything I needed to know about who I was dealing with. It was a Saturday morning, 9 days after my certified letter. I was in the backyard with Cole. He was up in the fort, his sneakers dangling off the edge of the platform, tossing acorns at a squirrel with extremely bad aim. When I heard the creak of the back gate latch, I turned around. Darlene, standing in my backyard, with a man I didn't recognize, heavy-set, polo shirt, clipboard of his own, who she introduced as the association's independent inspector. No knock, no call, no notice. "We're just here to document," she said, in that particular voice people use when they're trying to sound reasonable while doing something unreasonable. I had a very specific reaction in that moment, not the anger from before. This was colder, focused. Because I happened to know, because Renata happened to know, that in Ohio, a homeowners association has no legal right to enter private property without prior written notice of at least 48 hours, except in cases of emergency. This was not an emergency. This was a woman in a visor and a man with a clipboard invading my backyard on a Saturday while my kid was eating breakfast 30 feet away. "You need to leave," I said. "Now. We have the right to inspect. You do not." Ohio Revised Code 5312.14. Written notice, 48 hours minimum. You have neither. I'm asking you to leave, politely, once. The inspector looked at Darlene. Darlene looked at me. There was about 4 seconds of silence, the good kind, where a bluff is getting called in real time, and then they left. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board before noon. I also called my neighbor Tommy Raines from 3 doors down, who'd been on the receiving end of Darlene's targeting twice before, and who happened to own a security camera company. Tommy was out of his truck and in my backyard within the hour, installing a 4-camera system covering every point of entry. Motion triggered, cloud stored, time stamped. "She comes back without notice," Tommy said, drilling the last mount into the fence post with a satisfying mechanical thwunk. "You've got it all on video." But here is where the story gets interesting, because Darlene's unannounced inspection, for all its problems, had accidentally handed me something I hadn't expected. The independent inspector left a written report. The HOA, apparently trying to paper over the illegal entry, sent me a copy of his findings, as if the visit had been legitimate. And his report, I want you to picture me sitting at my kitchen table reading this at midnight, with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. His report noted that the tree fort appeared to be structurally sound, and measured the platform at approximately 200 square feet. 200 square feet. Platform surface. I set the report down very carefully. Then I pulled up the Ohio Residential Building Code on my laptop and looked up the definition of a deck. A deck, under Ohio Code, is defined as an exterior floor system supported on at least 2 opposing sides by an adjoining structure and slash or posts, piers, or other independent supports. A deck attached to a house requires a permit. A detached deck, a freestanding platform structure under 200 square feet in a residential backyard, does not require a permit in most municipalities in Ohio, including ours, unless it exceeds a certain height threshold, which varies. I looked at the fort. I looked at the code. I looked at the inspector's report, which had just officially documented the structure's dimensions in writing for me. A tree fort, legally speaking, is simply an elevated freestanding platform. A deck is a freestanding platform. The difference is largely one of framing, what you call it and what you attach to it. If the tree fort were to be modified, the rope ladder removed, a set of fixed wooden stairs added, railings installed per code, the surface treated as a deck surface, It would, under Ohio code, cease to be a playhouse or accessory structure. It would become a deck. And decks, under Ohio's residential code and most standard HOACC and ours, including, I was about to discover, ours, are classified as permanent improvements to the property, rather than accessory structures. Section 7 covered accessory structures. It said nothing about decks. I didn't sleep much that night, but it was the good kind of not sleeping, the kind where your brain is running so fast on an idea that your body just can't keep up. Darlene escalated next, the way bullies always do when they feel control slipping. She went social. Maple Creek Estates had a community Facebook group, Maple Creek Neighbors Connect, used mostly for lost dog notices and passive-aggressive posts about parking. 2 Fridays after the illegal inspection incident, a new post appeared under a pseudonym account, obviously Darlene's. The writing style was unmistakable. All our community standards and the integrity of property values, suggesting that a homeowner on Sycamore Terrace was refusing to comply with legitimate HOA safety regulations, and that this was affecting everyone's home values. No name. But there were 43 houses on Sycamore Terrace. The triangulation wasn't exactly hard. I watched the comments roll in for about 20 minutes. A few people agreed because they always do. But then, something shifted. Marguerite Hensley, the woman with the decorative windmill, posted, "I got a letter too last year. Mine was about a bird bath." A bird bath. The Torcello family, the Drawbridge Playhouse people, followed. "We never got a letter and our kids' playhouse is twice the size. Something's off here." Walt Braddock, the man with the barn-red shed, Darlene's favorite, commented, "I've had my shed for 8 years with 0 issues. I've always thought the enforcement here seemed uneven, just my 2 cents. When Walt Braddock throws you under the bus, you are cooked in this neighborhood. I didn't respond to the post. I screenshotted every comment. The next morning I sent a new certified letter, this time to the full HOA board and, crucially, to the association's insurance carrier, whose address I dug up from the HOA's own annual filing with the Ohio Secretary of State. The letter laid out 3 things in plain English: the illegal property entry, the selective enforcement documentation, and a formal request that the HOA's compliance actions against me be reviewed by the association's attorney before any further fines were levied. I CC'd Renata, listed in the letter as my legal representative. She is a paralegal, not an attorney, but legal representative is not the same as attorney, and I was careful not to claim otherwise. The effect, however, was immediate. 3 days later, Clifton Mears called again. This time his voice had a different quality, higher, faster, like a man who'd just gotten off a call with someone he didn't enjoy talking to. "Garrett, the board has decided to put your compliance notice on hold, pending internal review." "How long is the review?" 60 days. "Thank you, Clifton." I hung up and sat with that for a moment. 60 days. Darlene had been put on pause. Not stopped, paused. Which meant I had 60 days to convert a tree fort into something that was, legally and structurally, not subject to Section 7 at all. I called a structural engineer I knew through the shop, a guy named Drew Alvarado, semi-retired, who'd spent 30 years building things in Ohio, and who had approximately 0 patience for people who abuse process. I described what I had: an 8-foot oak-mounted platform, 200 square feet, solid construction, good bones. "Can it become a deck?" I asked. Drew was quiet for a second. I could hear him chewing something. "Structurally? Probably. You'd need to bring it up to deck code. Railings, stairs, load rating, ledger board, or freestanding posts. You'd want it to stop being tree-dependent. Use the oak for aesthetics, not structure. Freestanding deck with the tree growing through an opening in the platform. How long? Weekend project, if you already have the bones. Maybe 2 weekends. How much? Materials? Maybe $1,200. I'll come look at it Saturday, charge you for 2 hours of my time. Deal. Here's what I knew and what I want you to know too, because this is important. In Ohio, and in most states, a freestanding deck under a certain square footage, typically 200 square feet, does not require a building permit. Check your local code. This varies by municipality, but the principle holds in hundreds of jurisdictions across the country. A deck is not an accessory structure under most HOA CC and RS, and the HOA's own inspector had just handed me a signed document declaring my platform was approximately 200 square feet. Sometimes the documents your enemies create are more useful than the ones you'd write yourself. The structural conversation with Drew was the piece I'd been consciously building toward. But the real shift, the thing that changed the entire shape of this fight, came from somewhere I wasn't expecting. Renata was reviewing the HOA's governing documents one evening, while I was in the garage cutting cedar boards on the miter saw, sawdust settling on my forearms like pale snow. She came out with her laptop, and a look on her face I recognized. The look she gets when she finds something genuinely surprising in a legal document. The look that's part disbelief and part barely suppressed excitement. She set the laptop on my workbench. "Read this," she said, pointing to a passage. It was an amendment to the CC and RS, filed in 2019. I'd never noticed it because it was buried in the 7th Amendment to the original covenant, which nobody reads because by the time you've gotten through 6 amendments, you've lost the will to live. The amendment added, I'd later learn, after a neighborhood dispute about a pergola 3 blocks over, read as follows. Section 12, Clause 3A. Permanent improvements to residential property that increase assessed value, including but not limited to decks, patios, driveways, and landscaping installations, are encouraged by the association and shall not be subject to aesthetic review under Section 7, provided they comply with all applicable municipal codes and do not encroach on common areas. Read that again. I'll wait. Permanent improvements that increase assessed value shall not be subject to aesthetic review under Section 7. A deck is a permanent improvement. A deck increases assessed value. In fact, according to data from the National Association of Realtors, a well-built deck returns between 65% and 80% of its cost in increased property value. It was right there in the association's own amendment, intended to protect Darlene's friends who wanted pergolas and brick patios, and it was now going to protect my tree fort conversion. But it got better. Because, while Renata was reading, I started looking at the history of that amendment. Who had proposed it? The HOA board meeting minutes, which, as HOA records, are technically public documents available to all members, were filed online in a password-protected portal. I'd gotten the password from Clifton months earlier when I was trying to access the pool maintenance schedule. I logged in. The amendment had been proposed by 1D Fitch, board member, Compliance and Architectural Review Chair. Darlene had written the very amendment that was now going to protect my deck. She had written it to protect a pergola belonging to her friend. I found the original board discussion in the meeting notes, and had almost certainly never considered that it would one day be used against her own complaint. Play stupid games. There was one more thing in those meeting minutes, and this one I want you to sit with for a second, because it matters to the larger story of what Maple Creek Estates actually was underneath its manicured surface. The same 2019 amendment discussion included a comment from Darlene, recorded in the minutes as, "We need to protect the investments of homeowners who've been in this community a long time. The character of this neighborhood depends on who's building here." Who's building here? Not what they were building. Who? Renata and I looked at each other across my workbench. "Save that," I said. She'd already highlighted it. The next 3 weeks were the most productive of my adult life, outside of the actual work of raising coal. And I want to walk you through exactly what we built. Not just the physical deck, but the whole architecture of what was coming. Drew Alvarado showed up the following Saturday morning, thermos of coffee in hand, wearing the expression of a man who enjoys a good puzzle. He walked the oak, knocked on the platform boards, crouched under the structure and looked up at the lag bolt connections with a flashlight, took measurements, made notes in a small spiral notebook in a handwriting so small I genuinely couldn't read it. "Here's what you do," he said, sitting on my back steps. "You add 4 freestanding 6x6 posts, anchored in concrete footings, 12-inch diameter, 3 feet deep, at the corners. They carry the structural load. The oak stops being a structural element and becomes decorative. You cut an opening in the center of the platform to let the trunk grow through. Give it 6 inches of clearance all around for expansion. Then you build out the platform, add a second framing layer, reinforce the joist span, install composite decking on top for durability. Railings, 36 inches high, code minimum, on all open sides. A set of fixed stairs with a landing, built to IRC stair code, 7-inch max rise, 10-inch min run. What's the final square footage? He looked at his notes. As designed? Right at 200 square feet for the upper platform, with the stair landing adding maybe 24 more. You can build out from the base if you want, lower tier deck at grade, connecting to the upper, and that can go as large as you want without triggering permit requirements in your municipality, as long as each independent section stays under 200. I grinned. So I could add a grill station. Drew looked at me over his thermos. Son, you could add a whole outdoor kitchen if you framed it right. We spent 2 hours sketching on graph paper at my kitchen table, Cole drawing his own version of the deck next to us in crayon. His version included a water slide, which we did not incorporate, although I considered it. The legal financial side was moving simultaneously. Renata had connected with a neighbor, Priya Bateson, a property attorney who'd bought her house on our street 2 years prior, and who, it turned out, had been waiting for exactly this kind of situation. Priya had her own run-in with Darlene, a letter about a mailbox post that was non-conforming in color, which Priya had ignored so thoroughly that Darlene had apparently given up. Priya agreed to review our situation on a flat fee basis, and within 4 days she'd produced a 6-page memo that laid out 3 legal instruments we now had available. First, a selective enforcement defense. If the HOA ever moved to fine us, the documented proof that 31 similar structures had been ignored created a viable claim that enforcement was discriminatory and therefore unenforceable. Ohio courts have upheld selective enforcement defenses in HOA cases. It's not a guaranteed win, but it's a strong argument that most small HOA boards genuinely cannot afford to litigate. Second, the 2019 Amendment Shield. A converted deck, complying with municipal code, explicitly fell outside Section 7's scope under Darlene's own amendment. The HOA would be contradicting its own governing documents to pursue us. Third, and this is the one I want you to remember, Priya flagged that the illegal property entry constituted a potential violation of Ohio Revised Code 2911.21, criminal trespass, as well as a civil claim. We weren't going to press criminal charges. That wasn't the goal. But the incident was now formally documented and could be introduced in any subsequent legal proceeding to establish a pattern of bad faith harassment. Takeaway. HOA, a selective enforcement, is a documented legal defense in most U.S. states. If you're being targeted, photograph everything your neighbors are getting away with. Courts notice patterns. We also did one more thing during this planning period, and it was Renata's idea. We invited 6 neighbors to a backyard barbecue. Low-key. Potato salad, the smell of charcoal and lighter fluid drifting over the fence, kids running through the sprinkler. No agenda announced. But the people who came, the Torcellos, Marguerite Hensley, Tommy Raines, Walt Braddock, Priya, we told them what we were doing and why. We showed them the documents. We showed them the 2019 amendment. Every single one of them asked what they could do to help. The construction started on a Saturday in late November. And if you want to understand the full theater of what was happening, you need to picture the physical reality. 6 adults in my backyard, post-hole digger going chunk, chunk, chunk into the cold Ohio clay. Drew Alvarado, directing traffic with the calm authority of a man who has built things in this state for 3 decades. And Cole, wearing a hard hat 2 sizes too large, handing people tools with enormous seriousness. The temperature was 42 degrees. The air smelled like frozen ground and cedar shavings. I was happy in a way I don't have words for. Darlene's kitchen window faced our fence line. I did not look at it. I didn't need to. By Sunday afternoon, the 4 concrete footings were poured and curing, gray and solid in the earth. The oak stood in the middle of them like a king at a round table, unbothered. Hello. Darlene filed an emergency complaint with the HOA board, citing ongoing construction activities without board approval. Clifton Mears called me at 7:15 a.m. I was already at the shop, could hear the compressor running in the background, smell of diesel and rubber in the air. Garrett, the board has received a complaint about construction at your property. Hi, Clifton. That construction is the installation of a freestanding residential deck, which under Section 12, Clause 3, A, of your 2019 amendment is explicitly exempt from Section 7 aesthetic review, provided it complies with municipal code, which it does. I have a letter from the city confirming no permit is required for this structure. Would you like me to fax it to you? Silence. Yes, please. I faxed it. I also faxed a copy of the 2019 amendment with Clause 3A highlighted in yellow, because I believe in being thorough. That should have been the end of it. But Darlene wasn't finished, because Darlene had never in 11 years actually been stopped, and she didn't know what that felt like yet. The following weekend, I came home from the shop at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday to find a city inspector's vehicle in my driveway. Not because there was anything wrong, but because someone had filed a complaint with the city building department claiming my deck exceeded permitted dimensions and may encroach on utility easements. Anonymous complaint. The inspector, a tired-looking man named Gerald Spears, who had the energy of someone in year 27 of a job he no longer loved, walked the site, measured, checked the utility easement maps, and spent about 11 minutes confirming that the deck was 200 square feet, correctly set back, not over any easements, and required no permit. He handed me a form. You're clear. Whoever called this in wasted your time and mine. Any idea who called it in? I asked. He looked at me with the flat expression of a man who'd been around this block. I can't say, but it's the third call we've gotten about this address in 2 weeks. 3 calls. Someone was burning their relationship with the city building department to harass a guy building a deck. I thanked him, walked him out, and before I'd even gone back inside, Tommy Raines, who'd seen the inspector's truck from his driveway, was already texting me. Her car was parked on the street for 2 hours today. Cameras got the timestamps. I should tell you that somewhere in this period, I started feeling something shift in the neighborhood. Not dramatically, not like a movie where everyone suddenly stands up and cheers. More like the quiet accumulation of people who'd been holding their breath, slowly deciding to breathe again. Marguerite brought Cole a plant for the deck. The Torcellos offered to help with the railing installation. Walt Braddock walked over one evening and stood at my fence and said without any preamble, "I've been watching what's been happening on this street for a long time, and I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner." Walt was 71 years old. He'd seen a lot of things he hadn't said anything about. No apology needed, Walt, I told him. He helped me hang the string lights. The deck was finished on the first Saturday of December. Cedar boards, warm reddish-brown in the winter light, the oak rising through the center platform opening like a monument. String lights, a grill station on the lower tier that Drew and I had framed in with composite lumber, and a granite-look countertop from a salvage yard. Total cost for the countertop, $60. Railings at 36 inches, code-compliant, with decorative spindles Cole had painted orange, because Gerald the dinosaur's favorite color is orange. We were eating dinner out there in 40-degree weather, with space heaters and blankets like absolute lunatics, and I don't think I've ever enjoyed a meal more. The HOA's 60-day compliance review had run out. The board had not issued any new notices, I believe because Priya had sent them her 6-page memo with a politely worded final paragraph, noting that any further action would be responded to with a formal selective enforcement complaint, and a demand for all HOA meeting minutes and financial records going back 5 years. Financial records going back 5 years. That one had given Clifton Mears a very specific kind of pause that told me there was something in those records that he did not want me to see. But Darlene had one more move, and I'll give her this. It was bold. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for the 3rd Thursday of December, the meeting where board positions are voted on and the budget is approved. Darlene, I would later learn, had spent the week before that meeting making phone calls to neighbors she'd cultivated over the years, asking them to attend and vote down any new business that challenged the board's authority. She had also apparently reached out to 2 local real estate agents, people who'd sold houses in the neighborhood and had a financial interest in the HOA maintaining stability, and asked them to speak at the meeting in favor of tightening enforcement. What Darlene did not know was that Priya had filed a formal request under Ohio Revised Code 5312.13, which requires HOAs to provide meeting agendas and allow members to place items on the agenda with 14 days' notice, to add 2 items to the meeting agenda. Item 1, a formal review of the association's enforcement practices and compliance with Ohio law. Item 2, a motion to amend Section 7 to include explicit definitions of aesthetic character to prevent selective application. Both items were legally required to be on the agenda. Clifton had confirmed it in writing, with the tight, pained formality of a man sitting on a grenade. Priya had also, quietly, contacted the local newspaper, not to create a scene, to offer a story about HOA governance reform, about what happens when covenants become weapons. The reporter who responded was a woman named Sasha Dowell, who covered local government for the county paper, and who had, it turned out, been trying to find a solid HOA enforcement story for 6 months. Sasha came to my house the week before the meeting. She sat at my kitchen table, notebook open, and I walked her through every document. The compliance notice, the illegal entry, the 31 non-cited structures, the 2019 amendment, the city inspector's 3 call-outs. I showed her the financial questions I'd raised at that meeting 2 years ago, the 40% pool resurfacing budget jump, and mentioned that I'd be requesting financial records at the upcoming meeting. She asked me, at the end of 2 hours, what I wanted out of all of this. I told her I wanted Cole to be able to eat dinner on his deck. She wrote that down. The night before the meeting, I was in the garage, hands smelling of linseed oil from touching up the railing, when my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. No name. You should know that there's going to be an attempt at the meeting tomorrow to call a special vote and remove the agenda items Priya filed. Don't let them railroad it. I didn't know who sent it. I still don't. But whoever it was knew what was coming. I showed up at that meeting with Renata, Priya, Tommy, Marguerite, the Torcellos, Walt Braddock, and 11 other neighbors who'd quietly RSVP'd to a group chat Tommy had organized. I brought a binder. Priya brought a binder. Sasha Dowell was in the back of the room with a press credential and a camera. Darlene was already there when we arrived. She looked at the room filling up, at people who were supposed to be her allies sitting in my section, and for the first time since October, I watched something flicker behind her eyes that wasn't certainty. The Maple Creek Estates HOA meetings were held in the community center, a beige room with folding chairs and fluorescent lighting that buzzed faintly at a frequency specifically designed to make everyone mildly miserable. 32 of the 43 households on our street had sent someone. That was, I'd later learn, the highest attendance at an HOA meeting in at least 9 years. Clifton opened the meeting at 7 o'clock exactly, in the voice of a man who'd been dreading this day since November. He read the agenda. Both of Priya's items were on it. Darlene, seated at the board table in a green blazer, did not look at the room. They went through standard business first. Budget line items, pool maintenance schedule, holiday lighting policy, with the brisk mechanical efficiency of people trying to get to the thing they were afraid of. Then Clifton said, Item 6. Formal review of enforcement practices, submitted by Priya Bateson. Priya stood up. She's a small woman, compact, with the precise, unhurried delivery of someone who has spent 15 years reading documents in rooms full of people who didn't want her to find what she found. She laid it out methodically, the selective enforcement documentation, the 31 structures, the illegal property entry, the 3 city inspector calls, the timeline. She was not dramatic about it. She didn't need to be. The documents were dramatic enough. When she reached the part about the 2019 amendment, the one Darlene had written, she looked directly at Darlene and said, "The board's own amendment, proposed by its compliance chair, explicitly shields deck installations from Section 7 review. The notice issued to the Holloway family was therefore not only selectively enforced, it was issued in direct contradiction of the board's own governing documents." You could hear the fluorescent lights. Darlene started talking. She said, "Community character," 3 times in the first 90 seconds. She said, "property values," twice. She started explaining that the tree fort had been a hazard to adjacent properties, a claim she'd never made in any written notice, and which Priya immediately flagged as new and unsubstantiated. Then Walt Braddock raised his hand. Walt was in the 3rd row. He stood up slowly, the way old men do when they've decided that what they're about to say matters. He talked about his shed. He talked about how it had been there for 8 years, with no issue. He talked about other neighbors' structures he could name. He looked at Darlene and said, calmly and without malice, "I think most of us in this room know that the rules here have never been applied the same way to everyone. I think it's time we said that out loud." Marguerite followed. then one of the Torcello parents, then a man in the back I barely knew, from the far end of the street, who said he'd gotten a letter about his mailbox 2 years ago and had been afraid to push back. Then Sasha Dowell, from the back of the room, raised her hand and identified herself as a reporter. The room shifted. Board members who'd been sitting with the comfortable detachment of people who expected to control the outcome began exchanging glances. Clifton's jaw tightened. One board member, a woman named Harriet Voss, leaned away from Darlene as if proximity had suddenly become a liability. I hadn't said a word yet. I stood up last. I didn't use legal language. I didn't have a binder in my hand. I talked about Cole. I talked about the morning he handed me that crayon blueprint with Dad's Fort 2 written on it. I talked about what it means to build something with your kid, and what it means to have that thing threatened by someone exercising power they were never supposed to have. I talked about the other families in this room who'd gotten letters, who'd felt the same way, who'd thought they were alone. This neighborhood, I said, is better than what's been done in its name. Darlene attempted to call for an adjournment. It failed, 21 votes to 7. The vote on Priya's first agenda item, a formal censure of the enforcement practices documented in her presentation, passed, 24 to 6. Board members Harriet Voss and a man named Dale Pruitt voted with the residents. The vote on the second item, mandating written objective criteria for Section 7 enforcement, passed unanimously. All 5 board members, including Clifton, voted yes. Darlene did not vote on the second item. She'd left the room 2 minutes before the vote. Sasha Dowell's article ran the following Tuesday. The headline, HOA enforcement dispute leads to governance overhaul in Maple Creek Estates. It quoted Walt. It quoted Priya. It quoted Cole, who, when Sasha asked him what he liked best about his deck, said, "You can see the whole yard from up there, and also Gerald's up there." Gerald the dinosaur flag was, in fact, still flying. I'd left it there on purpose. In January, Darlene Fitch resigned from the HOA board. She cited personal reasons in a 2-sentence email to Clifton, which was shared with the community in the February newsletter with no additional comment. The following month, the board elected 2 new members, Priya Bateson and Tommy Rains. The HOA announced a full audit of financial records going back 5 years, conducted by an independent CPA firm. The pool resurfacing anomaly, that 40% budget jump I'd asked about 2 years earlier, turned out to involve a vendor relationship that the board's attorney described in careful, bloodless language as requiring further review. I will leave that thread for you to pull. The enforcement procedures were rewritten from scratch. Section 7 now requires photographic documentation, a written description citing specific language from the CC and RS, and notice to all board members, not just the compliance chair, before any compliance action is issued. Violations have to be documented across the entire neighborhood, not selectively. The new rules were sent to every homeowner with a cover letter, signed by the full board. It's not perfect, no system is, but it's better, and better is worth something. Cole's deck, because it is his deck, make no mistake, became the social center of the Holloway household. We had 11 people over for the Super Bowl in February, crammed onto that cedar platform in the cold, with a fire pit and enough chili to fuel a small army. The oak was strung with lights. Gerald the dinosaur flag cracked in the wind above our heads. Cole sat in the high spot, the original fort platform, now the upper tier of the deck, with a blanket and a bowl of chips, watching the adults argue about football. And he looked so specifically, completely at home, that I had to turn away for a second. Renata squeezed my arm. There's a thing about fighting back that people don't always tell you. It doesn't end the moment you win. The relief takes a while to arrive. You've been in a particular posture, defensive, watchful, documenting everything, and it takes time to uncurl from that. Some nights in January I still found myself making notes, out of habit, before I remembered that the notes weren't needed anymore. But here's what I want to leave you with, because this story isn't actually about me. In March, Priya and Tommy proposed, and the board approved, the creation of a Maple Creek Community Fund, seeded with a portion of the HOA's administrative reserve budget and open to annual contributions from residents. The fund's first initiative, a small scholarship program for Maple Creek students heading to vocational programs or community college, with priority given to students pursuing skilled trades. The first recipient, announced in April, was a kid from the next street over who was going to Columbus State to study HVAC technology. I wrote a check. It felt like the right thing to do with money that had never been spent on a fine. Sasha Dowell wrote a follow-up piece. It ran in 3 regional papers, and the deck is still standing. Drew Alvarado came by in the spring to see it in full leaf. The oak branching out above the upper platform, throwing shade over the grill station, roots running deep into that Ohio clay. He stood there for a minute with his coffee, looking at it, and said, "That's a good deck, Garrett. It really is."